Welcome to Stab the Dragon for the first movie review, A Farewell to Arms. Here is the music from the 1957 edition. The music's by Mario Nasimbene, but I'm going to be reviewing the 1932 movie, not the 1957 movie. This is directed by Frank Borzage, starring Gary Cooper, Helen Hayes, and Adolphe Meneu, by Paramount Pictures. It's black and white, 80 minutes. My edition of the movie was on the Film Detective Restored Classics DVD. Watched it August 21st, 2021. This movie is based on the semi-autobiographical novel of the same name by Ernest Hemingway. The screenplay is written by Benjamin Glazer and Oliver H.P. Garrett. In 1934, the movie won 2 Oscars for Best Cinematography and Best Sound Recording. It was also nominated for Best Picture and Art Direction. In 1934, the Best Picture was won by Cavalcade. Frank Borzage was born in 1894 of parents who had immigrated from Austria and settled in Pennsylvania, where their firstborn, Frank, was born. Then they moved to Utah. At 18 years of age, Frank set his eyes on becoming an actor and got his first acting job in Hollywood. 3 years later, he's directing his first silent film, The Pitcher Chance. His 1927 movie, Seventh Heaven, was nominated for the very first Academy Award for Best Picture, but did not win. Frank won Best Director, however. Frank's films were noted for being intense romances where adversity interfered with the lovers, as we see here in A Farewell to Arms. I'm going to turn this music off now. There we go. That's much better. His films were noted for being intense romances where adversity interfered with the lovers, as we see here. At one point in time, Frank had married Red Skelton's ex-wife, Edna Stilwell Skelton. He was a noted polo player, a yachtsman, and golfer. He died in 1962. I'm not familiar with any of his other movies besides A Farewell to Arms. Now, in the last couple of years, 2019 to 21, my wife and I have started purchasing and watching a lot of older movies for a couple of reasons. Now, we've always loved older movies, but I've kind of made a concerted effort here lately. We love the early movies. They rely on talent much more than special effects. And also, secondly, there's a fear that there'll be an increasing tide of censorship here in America soon, and it would be wise to collect older books and movies for the dark ages that will come. I might just be paranoid. One of the actors we're interested in collecting is Gary Cooper. Now, Frank James Cooper, also known as Gary, is one of my favorite actors from that time period because of his 1941 movie, Sergeant York, 1952 movie, High Noon, and then also The Fountainhead from 1949. Gary Cooper lived 1901 to 61. He won 2 Oscars for Best Actor, one for Sergeant York, one for High Noon. He was one of the top money-making stars for about 18 years. The American Film Institute ranks him as 11th on the 25 greatest stars of the classical era of Hollywood. Cooper was born in Helena, Montana, of English immigrants. His dad was a lawyer, a rancher, and he eventually served on the Montana Supreme Court. So because of growing up riding horses, he entered Hollywood as an extra and a stuntman on horses. His first movies were westerns like Riders of the Purple Sage, The Lucky Horseshoe with Tom Mix. Interesting side note, there's a Tom Mix museum by my hometown. I live in, I'm talking about Dewey, Oklahoma. And another movie, The Thundering Herd. All these are silent movies. It was in 1929, his first talking movie, The Virginian, that made Gary Cooper a star. Now, Norman Rockwell, the famous American artist, used Gary Cooper as a model for one of his popular Saturday Evening Post covers, The Texan from May 24th, 1930. Cooper starred along with Ingrid Bergman in another Hemingway novel-based movie, For Whom the Bell Tolls, in 1943. And he and Bergman were both nominated for Best Actor/Actress in the Academy Awards that year, but did not win. But the movie won critical acclaim and was very profitable. Cooper was raised in the Episcopal Church, but did not practice his faith much, yet he was known for having a spiritual side, and in his dying months, he stated that he would trust in God. He was only married to one woman, Veronica Balfe, but was known to have had many affairs, including one with Ingrid Bergman while filming For Whom the Bell Tolls. He maintained a 20-year friendship with Ernest Hemingway. He was an outspoken, well-known conservative Republican, and yet he stood up for his screenwriter friend from High Noon when he was named as a communist by the House Un-American Activities Committee. Cooper died of cancer in 1961. Now, why did I watch this movie? My wife had mentioned A Farewell to Arms kind of randomly a couple of weeks ago, so I ordered it, and this past weekend we put it in and watched it. Now, in 2004, I was kind of on a Ernest Hemingway reading kick and read A Farewell to Arms. Here's my copy of the book right here. I've got a whole set of these Hemingway classic hardbacks. And so I've read probably at least three books of Hemingway, maybe four, and some short stories. But this is a classic of American literature, and I like watching movies of famous novels, famous authors that I've read. So I figured it was finally time to watch this movie. The movie was actually the first Hemingway novel to be produced, and a second edition, or second movie, a remake of this movie in 1957, starring Rock Hudson and Jennifer Jones. And that's the music that I was playing there at the start of this recording. So I'm a big Gary Cooper fan. Done a lot of reading in World War I history as well, and so I like movies that have to do with World War I. So you just combine all those factors, you know, Gary Cooper, Ernest Hemingway, World War I, and I just, you know, I couldn't lose with watching this movie. Now, the audio in the movie gave us a bit of a struggle, so we missed some of the dialogue, and there's no closed captioning. The movie was black and white, and a lot of the scenes appeared to be at night, so there was almost a film noir effect. The movie's visual appearance was certainly not crisp or clean. It's a bit grainy. I mean, this is a 1932 movie, so it's old, and its presentation is just difficult. Now, the darkness of the set contributed to this, but in reading about the film, I found that this was actually part of the intention. It is a dark, disturbing, anti-war film about World War I and about a romance that ends in tragedy. The director wanted a dark movie. So this book was definitely a dark book. I mean, reading Hemingway, I mean, it's always a sad story when you read Hemingway. The plot revolves around a wounded Lieutenant Frederick Henry. Henry's an American volunteer in the Italian Army Ambulance Corps. Now, how does that even happen, right? But actually, this was kind of a thing in World War I. Keep in mind, the war started in 1914, but America did not get involved in the war until 1917. So there was actually a large group of Americans who volunteered in various capacities in some of the armies, the British Army, the French Army, the Italian Army. In the French Army, there was a famous group of flyers from America, the Lafayette Escadrille. And then ambulance drivers were a big thing, both in the British Army and the Italian Army. Hemingway himself served in the Italian Army in this capacity as a volunteer ambulance driver. So that's the basic, you know, so the movie's a little bit autobiographical by Hemingway. So here's Lieutenant Henry. He is in the Army Ambulance Corps. He meets this British Red Cross nurse. And again, you've got a British nurse serving with the Italian Army, but she's Red Cross. And her name is Catherine Barclay. So they eventually start a romance when Henry gets wounded in artillery barrage, and he gets evac to her hospital, and she helps take care of him. And then, of course, she gets pregnant, and then they get married in secret. and Henry returns to duty on the Italian front. Catherine then, when she realizes that she's pregnant, abandons her job as nurse and flees to Switzerland, where she writes letters to Henry, giving him her new address. Now, Henry's got a surgeon friend, Captain Rinaldi, who is the happy-go-lucky, living for pleasure kind of a Italian guy. And, he's the surgeon, and so he outranks Lieutenant Henry. Well, what he's doing is he is preventing the two from writing letters to each other. And so he returns the letters to sender. And so Henry never gets Catherine's letters. Catherine never gets Henry's letters. And that creates some serious angst in their relationship in the movie. Eventually, Lieutenant Henry figures out what's going on. And he finds the letters, and so he then is going to go back and find his wife. Now, keep in mind, all these letters have return to sender, so he does not know her address. Just kind of a side note, return to sender makes me wonder if Elvis Presley saw this movie. The plot and the message of the movie then thickens as on his way back to Milan, to the hospital where he last knew Catherine was, he's abandoned his job as an ambulance driver, and so he is leaving the front without permission. He is picked up as a deserter and is about to be executed along the way. And so he's got to make a desperate escape from being executed. He eventually does get back to Milan, only to find out that his wife is no longer there. He's got to convince Catherine's friend, who hates him for getting her pregnant, to tell him where she is. Henry finally then eludes the patrols. He's got to row across a lake in the middle of the night, and there's patrols there to keep people from going to Switzerland to escape the war. He eludes the patrols. He gets to Switzerland, finds the hospital where she is having the baby, and after giving birth to a stillborn child, Catherine dies in Henry's arms as the sun rises and the news of peace in the war is being released in the newspapers. So that's the plot, and I guess I did give tell you the ending there without giving advanced warning. Well, here's the plot question. Is Rinaldi interfering with the letters of the two lovers due to his stated reason that he simply didn't want Henry to get messed up by loving just one lady, and he doesn't know that the two are married? Or was it more dark than that, because Rinaldi initially was trying to go on a date with Catherine, and so maybe Rinaldi's jealous? So that's a little unresolved mystery within the story. Now, the movie and the book speaks of the meaninglessness of the war, the senseless slaughter, and how two people abandon their responsibilities to seek meaning in a romantic love relationship, which also in the end fails and ends in death and loneliness. There are no winners in this movie, except possibly Rinaldi, who only lives for pleasure. He has no commitments other than to his skill as a surgeon. To fully appreciate this movie, I think really you'd have to learn a little bit about the horrors of World War I, know a little bit about the personal life of Ernest Hemingway. The war introduced trench warfare, machine guns, airplanes used as weapons, poison gas, massive amounts of casualties. This was the industrial age gone to war on a big scale. The war ended with not much of a resolution. There was no clear-cut victory. There was an armistice, and then there's the Treaty of Versailles. But the Germans never really acknowledged that they had lost, and the war eventually did lead to the Second World War. And yet, this First World War, the Great War, was sold as the war to end all wars, the war for democracy. Culturally, what the war led to is called the Lost Generation, and the world's problems did not get any better. The movie had some problems with the censors, who objected to some of the childbirth scenes, so there was some censorship there. The tragic ending, however, was released in Europe, but oddly enough, the American audiences got a couple of different endings, including a happy ending where Catherine survives, and one ending that leaves things kind of up in the air. So different versions of the film lasted up to 92 minutes, or some were 88 minutes. My version was 80, and I've read that some were even just 78 minutes. Should you watch this film? Well, if you're a big fan of Gary Cooper like I am, if you like early Hollywood movies like we do, if you're a fan of Ernest Hemingway, or if you're a fan of World War I movies, then yeah, definitely watch this movie. I kind of think that most younger modern film fans will not likely enjoy this movie because the technical side of Hollywood in 1932 was quite primitive compared with what's popular now. Hemingway himself is reported not to have liked the movie much. And in all fairness, I did find the sound quality distracting. I felt the story was rushed. It was a little bit too choppy. I think if they had played it out another 10, 15, maybe even 20 minutes longer and allowed characterization to develop more, to give a little bit more of the background and details, that may have helped the movie. I think it was just a little bit too short. Now, the art of the movie I did appreciate, despite making it somewhat difficult to watch. And the acting I definitely did like. You know, there's a more of a reliance on talent in these older movies than special effects, although some special effects were used. So if you're a student of World War I and you like World War I movies, this is one that perhaps people don't put on their World War I list. And I would say you need to add that. So in the past year or so, I have also invested some time in reading Fitzgerald's The Great Gatsby and watching both the 1949 and 74 movies of Gatsby. And along with that novel and the two movies, I've read a considerable amount of history of the 1920s to get a grasp of that time period. The novel and the movie of A Farewell to Arms perfectly fit in with what I learned from reading Gatsby and reading about the Roaring Twenties. The Great War altered the morals and the ethos of the world during that time. In this movie, both Catherine and Henry are the anti-heroes, really. They abandon personal responsibilities. That they leave their duties to go take care of a personal pursuit that's not honorable. The world had been ravaged by senseless slaughter for 4 long years, causing untold millions to doubt their faith, to doubt their morals, their convictions, to doubt everything about their society. This movie and the story it's based on have a strong message that is understandable for those times. It's a message of existential doubt and of living for oneself. And this is what made Hemingway one of the popular icons for the lost generation. So my final analysis, this movie is certainly not one of my favorites, but I do consider it to be a valuable classic film, and I'm glad we watched it. Well, that's all for this time, and this is the first movie review that I've done online, so hopefully we'll do some other ones. So thank you for watching, and we'll see you